record now. Brilliant.
And for those who've just joined, if you're seeing a lot of numbers in the chat box, I think Charlie's put the question in there, but if you're happy to share, let us know how confident you're feeling with your major gift fundraising at the moment, with 1 not very confident at all and 10 kind of really on top of the world with it and feeling really good about it. And thank you for being so prompt. This is amazing. We've got so many people joining and we've got a couple of minutes, Charlie, 1 minute to be exact.
Great. Quite a mixed bag with the numbers coming up, Louise. So we've got a range from 1 or 2. I haven't seen any that's higher than a 7, I don't think yet. Yeah, I think 7's about the highest so far.
Which is pretty understandable in a year of global pandemic.
Yeah.
We get that. So, Charlie, what are we looking like on numbers? Because we're coming up to past. Do we want to give it another minute or 2 in case anybody's still logging in on the link?
I think we're good to make a start, actually. So we're just over 100 people. So which is essentially what we were expecting. I can see lots of people still joining, but yeah, I think we're good to make a start.
Excellent. So thank you so much for joining today. Really appreciate your commitment to raising more, learning more. It's a hectic time at the moment. So just a little bit of housekeeping. You should all be on mute. If you can just double check, that would be great. Charlie mentioned previously we are recording this, so that means that you can forward it on and share it with colleagues, and that will be going out in an email later today. Feel free to tweet if you would like to, and you're on Twitter. Our handles are on the screen there, @VividCharlie, @Summit Fundraising. And we're going to have time at the end for questions. So if you have any questions as we're going through, pop them in the chat box. If you can put question at the beginning, that means it's a bit easier for Charlie and I to skim through and see. So Charlie and I were really looking forward to today. We've, between us, got experience of working with over 600 charities and non-profits. Charlie helping individuals and teams become more resilient, and myself helping organisations raise more large gifts. And when we met to discuss what we'd cover off, we had a lot longer list in these 3 areas, and we had to be really quite strict about what we'd cover. We want to keep it to an hour. So we chose these areas because this is what we're hearing the most from fundraisers and leaders right now. These are the types of questions, the types of areas that have come up in our work and that people are asking us. So some of what we discussed today you might already be doing, which is fantastic. Hopefully that will give you more confidence. But our aim of today is that you go away feeling that bit more confident, and that you also have some practical tips to put into practice. So remember the question box in the chat, the questions in the chat box if you have any, and we're going to kick off with the first area. Brilliant. So Charlie, we were discussing this the other day. It is a particularly difficult time to be engaging major donors. I know a lot of you will be experiencing this right now, but specifically because what a lot of our organisations are doing has changed so much in the past few months. So for example, I've been working with charities who've actually stopped some of their services. We know that as fundraisers, some of you are having to go back to donors and ask for their money to be spent in a different way because the project they restricted their money to just isn't happening. So lots of tough situations. If you had a lovely, shiny 3-year, 5-year strategy that really showed the difference you were going to make, and you used to take donors through that or use that, I mean, that's all kind of gone up in the air and been ripped up, really, with all the changes with coronavirus. And so for many fundraisers and leaders I've been working with, Charlie, it's really led to a knock on their confidence and I would say increased anxiety in some cases, because it's almost like the number of questions that you could be asked that you don't have the answers to have just increased hugely due to the pandemic. So what can people do, Charlie, in this situation, and what would you recommend?
Thanks, Louise. Yeah, I think, I mean, we'll come on to talk about how we can look after ourselves in terms of our anxiety, confidence, our resilience, and so on a bit later on. But I suppose the first thing I'd say is when have we ever, as fundraisers, had everything that we need at our fingertips? Um, I know when I was early on in my fundraising career, I was always striving to create or to get my hands on some way this kind of perfectly comprehensive case for support, to use kind of fundraising jargon. You know, that kind of utopia document where everything is clearly laid out. We've got all the stories, we've got all the stats, we've got all the costs, we've got all the quotes from the experts, and a lovely kind of design document. And of course, as my fundraising career progressed, I knew that holy grail, that never comes about. And even if you did create a document like that, or a set of resources, you know, by the time you put it together, it's out of date. So I guess the first thing I would say is, when have we ever as fundraisers had a perfect picture of what we're fundraising for? Often we are finding ourselves needing to kind of scrabble around, you know, the best will of the world to gather the information that we need in order to put together that fundraising proposal. So I say that because to say that this is in some ways nothing new to us fundraisers, and many people on the call will be really practiced at magicking up a sort of fundraising proposal from what at the outset could feel like scraps of information, and when they really get going, they find that they do have what they need, at least to initially start a conversation with a donor. So that's the first thing I'd say is, do we always need the level of information, the level of detail that perhaps we tell ourselves that we need? I know I've done lots of trustee training, and often trustees, in order for them to feel confident to go out and talk to potential major donors about the cause, they often say, I need more information, I need more stats, I need more you know, written material, if you like, collateral, for me to feel confident. And actually, as we start going through the training and unpick that a little bit, what they really need help with is to tap into their own reasons for becoming involved in the charity, their own reasons that they support, and what essentially are the stories about the people that the charity is there to serve. So I mention that not to detract from the fact that this is extremely difficult circumstances, and I don't want to undermine that or underestimate that in any way. But I suppose I want to get that out of the way in terms of saying, if anyone on the line is making the mistake that I made at the early start of my career, which was to kind of spend a lot of wasted time, wasted energy, trying to create a perfect case for support document, that will never happen. I know also how difficult it is to raise money when actually you're just not even sure what the projects are that you're raising money for. We know in major donor fundraising that donors often want quite tangible projects. They want to know the direct impact that their gifts are going to have. And when our organisation is in a state of flux and is having to kind of almost build the aeroplane as it's moving, if you like, it's very hard to talk to donors with the level of clarity that we ideally would want. So I suppose my advice and my kind of insight there is to think about the kind of core purpose, the core reason that your organisation exists, and then try and do everything you can to find stories that demonstrate that core purpose. So if your mission is to say end cruelty to children, as it was in my day back at the NSPCC, you know, I would be hopefully at this point arming myself with stories about why that is needed now more than ever. The other thing is, I think donors really appreciate transparency and honesty. And I was talking to a fundraising leader the other day, and she's had quite a dispiriting time of it, having to call major donors and tell them that the projects that they were so passionate about and that they'd funded were no longer happening, or certainly for the foreseeable future, because of the coronavirus. She said, honestly, Charlie, it was just it's that task that you kind of, you need to pick up the phone and you've been kind of putting it off. Anyway, she found herself getting into these calls. Of course, the donors were hugely understanding, and they really appreciated the fact that she'd taken the time to reach out to them and say, hands up, we don't know what's happening right now. Our trustees, our leadership team are working really hard to create a new plan for our future. And with so many unknowns, that's obviously going to take some time. In the meantime, you major donor, what would you like to do? And giving them that choice of, would you like to kind of to look after your donation until hopefully a point where the project is taking off again, or maybe is reshaped slightly, and then we can come and talk to you about that. Would you like to give your donation back until a time when we can come back to you with a new project? Or would you like to re-divert your donation to our general fund, sort of unearmark it if you like, and help us to direct it to where the need is greatest? And of course, what she found was the majority of donors were really happy to unrestrict their gift and direct it to where the need is greatest, which is amazing. And then there were a handful that were like, do you know what, I was really interested in this project. This was my baby. I really wanted to help make this happen. Could you come back to me at a point where there's, you know, a bit more clarity about what's happening? But what she learned was just what an amazing opportunity this is to have some of those slightly kind of tough conversations with donors, honest conversations, where as a fundraiser, we do need to be courageous. We need to dig deep within ourselves and pick up the phone and think, I don't know how this conversation is going to go. But the worst case scenario is that someone's going to be really, really annoyed and want their donation back. But obviously, because this is a situation that's impacted everyone globally, I think the chances of that happening are really, really slim. It's not that an organisation has messed up in some way, or, you know, kind of mismanaged funds or something like that, which is probably a bit more of a tricky conversation to have. It's actually something that's impacting everybody, and I think donors across the board are really, really understanding of that. I think also, I know that we were having a conversation about this the other day, Louise, about the importance of tooling fundraisers up to be able to strengthen their relationships with those senior stakeholders who are making these decisions. And I know from personal experience and from coaching hundreds of fundraisers now, that when you're a frontline fundraiser, you can sometimes feel like decisions are being made, you know, kind of far above our pay grade, and we're just kind of sat waiting for the powers that be to let us know what's going on. And that can feel quite disempowering as a fundraiser, and as though, oh, we have to kind of sit on our hands and just wait until we get the kind of messaging that we need. And so if you're a line manager on the line, or if you're a frontline fundraiser, I would just really encourage you to think about, who do I need to be strengthening relationships with internally now, so that when some of these decision-making processes are happening, and when some of these decisions are coming through, I am like front of their mind to let know what's happening. So whether that be kind of proactively grabbing a cup of coffee, you know, virtual cup of coffee with them, dropping them an email, letting them know what you're up to and the kind of information that you're looking for when it's available, whether it's thinking about, how can I help them? How can I make their life easier during this time? Because I'm sure they're under immense pressure as well. But there's something about a sort of a proactiveness, rather than sort of sitting back and thinking, oh, well, the organisation on large will let me know what's happening when they know. As fundraisers, we need to be out there proactively seeking answers on behalf of our donors and advocating for them. I think also a lot of organisations that I'm speaking to, so I was literally coaching someone this morning actually, and he is using this uncertain time as a chance to do some donor insight. He's like, Charlie, I don't feel that I've got anything at the moment that I can talk to my donors about. There's nothing new happening. I can talk to them about the work we've done in the past, but in terms of what we will be doing, I just feel at a complete loss. I just don't know what I can and can't say. And I'm just really scared about putting my foot in it and saying the wrong thing. And so he, through the coaching session, he has now decided to focus the next month or so on gathering donor insight. So he is devising a qualitative donor survey where he's asking them, how are you experiencing your support of our organisation? What are we getting right? What are we getting wrong? Obviously, building coronavirus in there. How have you been impacted? What can we do at this time to make your experience of supporting our charity even better? He's also using it as a chance to gather some data, you know, and update, make sure he's got their preferences and their permissions. So there's a little bit of a kind of database tidying exercise going on there as well. But he has found that building this survey. It's a paper survey, it's an email survey, and also he's doing telephone interviews. But it's giving him a really nice reason to get in touch with donors, a sort of gentle reason, if you like, rather than some hard-hitting information about upcoming projects, which he just doesn't have information on at the moment. But at least he's still strengthening his donor relationships, which is going really, really well. And of course, there's, the lots of great virtual events are happening across the board, aren't they? I know you've been involved with some, Louise, haven't you? Some really lovely donor events. Oh, I think I talked across you then. Yeah. So obviously when we spoke about it before, we talked about how virtual events can be a really nice opportunity to create that community, essentially, of like-minded people for whom you are their chosen cause, to get an expert online talking about some of the challenges that coronavirus has thrown up for your organisation, some of the opportunities, some of the issues that your organisation is grappling with and don't quite have the answers to yet. Again, really helping donors to sort of see behind the curtain of your organisation, let them know the things that your organisation hasn't got right, the things that we're finding difficult, and get the donors' insight and ideas and advice on how the organisation can move through this tricky time. Know that major donors like to feel involved, not only just by giving money, but giving advice and expertise. So those virtual seminars, focus groups, events, and so on work really, really well for that. And that we've got lots of great evidence that across the board. And I think the final thing I'd say before we move on to the next sort of topic is the chance that this gives us to strengthen our relationships with our frontline staff, for want of a better way of putting them, our experts, the people who are delivering our organization's purpose. They ultimately are at the heart of the organisation. They are frontline with beneficiaries or frontline delivering the work, and they are the people from whom we can gather those stories. And if they are working from home, perhaps we've got a bit more of a captured audience, if you like, a bit more able to kind of reach out, ask for that cup of coffee, ask to kind of find out more about their role, what do they enjoy about it, what's challenging about it, how are they finding things, and almost treating those internal stakeholders as we would our major donors. So really thinking about that, almost like cultivation plan, if you like, when like lots of touch points, what can I do to help them, and so on. So yeah, I was speaking to someone who works at a hospice, for example, and one of their therapists who does amazing work, she's found almost impossible to get hold of for the last 2 years, and this therapist is now delivering the counselling online to their some of their patients and the loved ones. And she said the other day they had the best, like almost 2-hour conversation over Zoom, hearing all about her work with patients. And she said by the end I felt like we hung up almost sort of absolutely like friends, as if I would definitely feel like I could pick up the phone to her now and say, oh Sandra, do you have a quote or do you have a story about this area of our work? So she said this is 2 years in the making, trying to get in front of this person who's delivering this amazing work, and then lo and behold, this has given her the opportunity.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Charlie. There's so many good insights there. And yeah, particularly on that last point, I'd echo that. I'm hearing fundraisers tell me that even though some of their service staff are busier than ever, the pandemic has really accelerated the relationship that they wanted to build with them. And I think that's in part because whilst there's huge amount of pressure to raise income, the profile of income raising has really, risen. And I think a lot of staff across the organisation are realising the value of fundraising and actually really wanting to help.
Yeah, absolutely. I think almost like we've moved from fundraising being something that's done in a kind of side office somewhere in a dark room. It's like this magic art that, somehow we magic in the money, and other people can just concentrate on delivering the work. And now people are realising that fundraising is everyone's business. It needs to be woven into everybody's job descriptions, ideally, part of everybody's KPIs, that, we all have a part to play here. And, it takes sort of an uncertain time like we're in sometimes for that to be thrown into the light. So there's great opportunity to have come from that, I think. someone's asked a question, but I think we'll come to questions at the end if that's okay with everybody. So if you do have any more questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box as we go along. If you preface it with question, then that'll make it easier for Louise and I to find the question. But hopefully that's helped in terms of thinking about ways in which you can carry on with your fundraising, carry on building relationships with your major donors and your prospects when you don't quite know what your organisation is going to be getting up to over the next kind of few months and years because of the plan, organisational strategy being a bit up in the air. Don't do what I did when I was at the NSPCC, which was when we had an organisational restructure and a brand new strategy. I was really new in my fundraising career, and I completely put the brakes on my fundraising and stepped back and just felt so kind of like, I don't want to say anything for want of saying the wrong thing. It was the worst thing I could have done, and actually it led to me feeling even less confident as a fundraiser actually. With hindsight, what I should have been doing was still getting those conversations in the diary, still getting those virtual coffee meetings, and talking to people about our work, because ultimately the overall mission remained the same. But I know that ultimately the pressure is on to deliver income. It's all right me saying, you know, have these nice conversations with donors, tell them the stories, but ultimately many of us on this call will be kind of being asked quite challenging questions about how much are you going to raise, by when, from whom. And if there's one thing that we know is when we're faced with uncertainty, very often organisations, line managers, staff can become very detailed focused. And so I'm speaking to a lot of fundraisers and leaders who are being asked to forecast line by line how much you're going to bring in. So Louise, I just wondered what advice you have for people on the line who are, you know, being asked these kind of questions, or line managers who are needing to deliver clarity around how much we can raise when we have no idea how our major donors and where they're at really, and how much they hopefully can still give us.
A few thoughts, Charlie. As you said, you know, we recognise that there's a huge amount of pressure on you at the moment to bring income in. The first thing for me around budgeting, reforecasting, planning, and this may hinder or help, but you're never going to get it right. You're just never going to get that number right, unless maybe you're in Q4 in a more regular year that isn't a pandemic year. And I always think of my time back at Unilever when I used to sell ice cream and various products, and in a summer like this summer, we'd have to forecast the number of ice creams we were going to sell. And that would be the number of ice creams that would be on the shelves in Tesco or in Asda. And of course we didn't get it right, because the weather forecast can't tell us how hot it's going to be. So we'd have a year like this where we were getting, you know, completely shouted out internally because, you know, we could have more sales, the shelves are empty, or you'd have a washout summer. And what we do, what the third sector does, is a lot more important than selling ice cream. That's why I'm here. But there are some real parallels there. Your role as a fundraiser, as a fundraising manager, wherever you are providing information, is to give your organisation the best view. And by best view, I'm talking about the most accurate, most realistic view, not the most optimistic view. And I think with everything that's happened, it can be really easy, because our banks of resilience, which we're going to come on to, are pretty low in some cases, to give the answer that we think we want to hear. So yeah, you know, that target might be all right. But your organisation needs to plan. A lot of you will have been through this process already, and all you can do is give the most realistic view. So one practical tip you can do that may help you is to think about 3 different scenarios. So rather than give one figure and give one number, would be to say, this is the worst case, this is what we think is realistic, and we as a team, again, you want to be standing as a team. If you have a team, it's quite lonely and scary to stand alone with a figure at the moment. So you've got your worst case, you've got your realistic, and this is what we think we could raise if X, Y, and Z happens, but we just can't. We just don't know if that's going to happen. And one fundraiser I've been working with recently who took this approach just said she feels like her weight's been kind of lifted because she hasn't nailed her colours to the mast with one figure that she kind of lives or dies on. So it's worth thinking that if you're not doing that already, and a lot of you, I'm sure, will be doing this, but because of the speed at which charities are working at the moment, it's worth remembering that bottom up, as you were saying, Charlie, kind of line by line. In we do need that robustness right now in terms of if you've got a 100 grand, 50 grand, £1 million, and if you've got that unknown at the moment, what are actually the chances of that coming in? And again, we need to be realistic about that, and potentially that means having some difficult conversations. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second is that you don't get income without the other side of the coin, which is investment and expenditure. So being asked to just look at one, don't do it. Don't look at it in isolation. Look at it also in terms of expenditure, because we know there's huge pressure on that. And even if your charity's benefited from the furlough scheme, if you haven't had certain people in your team in for 4 months, that is going to have an impact on what you're able to raise. So recognizing that. And one fundraiser had a really kind of penny dropping moment that I've been coaching the other day, and she just said, I can only do so much. I'm doing 3 people's jobs right now. And it doesn't help in some senses, I know, because you want that money to be raised. And at the same time, there is a raft of evidence that major donor fundraising is going to hold up. We'll send some of that out afterwards. It is an area that should be invested in, or at least not disinvested in. So you can fly that flag, but there's a slight irony there, because it still doesn't mean that you're going to hit that target, that initial budget that you had at the beginning of the year, which you set probably without, most of us set it before April, before December, when you didn't know about the pandemic. So I think linking back to that kind of realism and not just pure optimism is really important. And one kind of practical tool that can make this a bit more positive, because it all feels quite negative, doesn't it? Like, oh, we can't quite reach that figure, or is to frame it in terms of, if we have X, Y, and Z, then we can raise this. So again, you're looking at scenarios in essence, and it also enables you to a level of negotiation internally with senior management or trustees. If you're not, if we are going to be furloughing people for longer, then this is what we're likely to raise. If we have X, Y, or Z, we have more people in the team, or we can get that training budget back, or that person we were going to recruit, if we can recruit them, then this is what we might be looking at. So you can turn it into a more positive conversation rather than we're not going to hit, which I know is tough. And then thirdly is really linking to what Charlie said, which is contacting your major donors. And if your team's been on furlough, if you've been on furlough, it isn't too late. And there are 101 reasons in our minds why we don't do this. What if, their businesses have gone under in the pandemic? What if they've lost someone to coronavirus? What if the charity isn't on their radar? And all I can say to you is that the fundraisers and the teams who've done this have had really good success rates in terms of the calls being picked up, and really good conversations. So for example, the CEO of a London homeless charity I've been working with, one of his major donors works in construction, and so we had quite a chat about, gosh, he normally gives, what's that going to mean? You're not going to know unless you have the conversation. And the CEO did have a really positive conversation. The donor just volunteered the information and said, I'm not going to be on the streets, but to be honest, I don't know what's going to happen with my businesses this year. This is not going to be a year where I give a larger gift. Now, on the one hand, you can see that as negative. On the other hand, you know that, and you've managed that relationship and kept that relationship going. And then they can check in later in the year. Another lady, a hospice fundraiser I was working with, spoke to one of her major donors, and the lady said, it was quite early on in lockdown, I just don't know what's happening with my investments. It's all over the place, but I'm so glad you gave me a call. I've been really worried about the hospice. I've wanted to know how you were doing. And the other thing that these calls and these touch points are really helping with is fundraisers' motivation, which we're going to come on to on the last section. But the leaders and the fundraisers who are doing this are energized, because we're not in our roles to sit behind a desk all day and to have internal Zoom meetings, and connecting with people that really care about what we do and actually getting that different perspective is incredibly valuable. So, you know, I've also seen on social media people from various different charities going, I'm buzzing after a day of supporter calls, and it will help you with your forecasting, but it will help you in so many different ways as well. So if you think about those scenarios, you'll have a better idea, almost donor by donor, where they're at. And you can't over communicate in a pandemic. And I listened to a fascinating podcast just yesterday, actually, completely disconnected to today. And I'll send the link out. I'll with Charlie's information later. And this was from a vice president of the University of Notre Dame in the US, who have recently raised $5 billion from their latest appeal. So they're doing something right. But he talked about calling people with no agenda and called it joyous. And actually, you cannot go from this pandemic to asking for money. You're going to have that step at some point where, if you've already done it, brilliant. You've then got that kind of momentum to go back to people. But if you haven't already done it, it's not too late. You can contact people and say, how have you been? You know, well, I've been on furlough, or it's been crazy here, but what are 4 months? What are 5 months? How have things been for you? How are you doing? And that is so, so important. And actually, this huge team that raised billions, he counted the days. I think he said it was 56 days they made no ask. And they just had multiple donor contacts and really just checked in. So if you're calling to check in, it also means just so much of a more enjoyable experience. You're getting that opportunity, like we all want to do more, to just thank, to just check in, and you don't have that same anxiety that you might do if you're meeting to make an ask, or you think you're going to make an ask. And just that, the last practical tip linked to that is, it is coming out of our comfort zones a bit, particularly if a donor's been quiet, maybe they haven't emailed us back. But I would just challenge you, if you're up for the challenge, to just call 5 donors today, if you're really up for it. You probably won't get through to 3 or 4 of them. You might get through to 1 or 2. And I can guarantee you will feel better for having had that contact, and you'll also be helping your confidence in what you can raise, because you'll be getting a realistic view of where your donors are at. So I think that's probably enough on that second section, Charlie.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks, Louise. I think that's some really helpful insight when it comes to budgeting and forecasting when there's so many unknowns and uncertainties. I think there is a kind of managing upwards piece there within what you've said about managing expectations, celebrating those successes, and helping our senior stakeholders, trustees, senior leaders to understand that thanking and stewarding and looking after our donors really, really well at this point is absolutely the right thing that we should be doing. And I think that's something that we learned through the sort of recession, wasn't it, in 2008, that those charities that didn't just drop their donors like hotcakes as soon as they stopped giving because of the recession, those charities that kept nurturing, kept stewarding, then saw the benefits of that, you know, come 2010, 2011 and so on.
And Beatrice has just said in the chat box that she's had some of the best calls ever with donors during lockdown, which is just showing as well. I think, you know, we can easily forget now we're coming out of it a bit what those times were like, and also how much that connection means to people. So that's really good to hear.
Yeah.
And Lucy as well spent 2 weeks calling, the team spent 2 weeks calling donors. So as I said, if you're already doing it, brilliant, keep doing it to the people you didn't get through, and keep making those touching calls.
Yeah.
So the last area before question we were going to touch on, Charlie, which is huge. So I'm really challenging Charlie here on this. We know it's tough for a lot of you, very tough. And you're being pushed to succeed and to raise more when there's just so much uncertainty and so much extra work. You know, one manager said to me recently in major donor fundraising, I just don't feel I've done that much fundraising over the past couple of months, because she set her team up remotely. She was putting people onto furlough. She was bringing people back from furlough. She's been doing all the reforecasting. You know, and we know there's a lot of exhaustion. Our banks of resilience are quite low. Hopefully people are taking a bit of leave to recharge, but, you know, homeschooling, Black Lives Matters has been huge, and again has taken a lot of energy. and quite rightly. And there's, you know, I think a lot of the sector is really at danger of burnout, and a lot of people just under that pressure wanting to keep going and to keep raising as much as possible, and feeling, I think, a huge responsibility at the implications for not raising the money, as you know, we kind of see what's happening to the sector right now.
Yeah.
So Charlie, I know you've got so much amazing stuff on this area. What are your top tips for people right now in major gifts fundraising in this?
Yeah, I think it is very difficult to be courageous and bold and do some of those things that we've talked about in terms of picking up the phone and so on if we are feeling low in energy, sort of pulled in lots of different directions. And I use the term resilience. I know it's a kind of a term that's bandied around a lot at the moment, but I guess what I mean by resilience is that sense that if we have a knockback, we can get ourselves back up again, you know, either back to where we were before, or even better, even, you know, advanced from where we were before. So we've learned from the experience and we've grown from it. And if there's ever a time that we need to be resilient, my gosh, it's now. Fundraising has always been and will always be a demanding job. And I've long been concerned about almost as a sector, I think we need to be doing more to invest in fundraisers, well-being and resilience, because we put a lot of expectations and a lot of responsibility on the shoulders of sometimes quite young fundraisers, and that can take a toll. And that's putting aside a pandemic, working from home, loss of loved ones, homeschooling, living alone. I mean, never before have we been kind of government mandated to stay away from our loved ones. I mean, if that's not going to take a toll on our resilience and well-being, I don't know what is. The tips I would have, and there's so much that we could say here, is to recognise that when faced with uncertainty, it increases the cortisol and adrenaline in our body. So they are the stress hormones, right? So there's a physiological response in our body. And many people on this call will know that as the fight or flight response. And fight or flight response is about helping us to survive. And if we are in survival mode, our body is focused on keeping our heart pumping, our, you know, eyes and ears listening. We're in a heightened sense of kind of awareness. And that's why sometimes we can find it difficult to switch off, or we might find ourselves sort of scrolling through our screen and, you know, noticing notifications a lot more, being our attention being drawn away. We can find it difficult to focus. Other sort of common symptoms we might experience is kind of sleeplessness, maybe a loss of appetite, maybe an increase in appetite, wanting to withdraw away from people, or almost kind of a heightened sense of wanting to be around people, and almost kind of a fervent kind of communication. So if you're on this call and you're thinking, how can I look after myself and my colleagues? I think the first thing that I would recommend is to, as a group, have a real sort of open, honest, showing vulnerability conversation about what are those warning signs when I'm finding things difficult. And having that self-awareness to know what those early triggers are for you, and also letting your colleagues know that, because they will be different for each of us. So I was coaching someone the other day, and she said, "Oh, my colleagues know when when things are getting kind of on top of me, I'm starting to find things difficult to cope. When I start sending out loads of emails with like new ideas, and like I think we should be doing this, and I, you know, and almost kind of over communicating." I was like, gosh, that's so interesting, because I'm the complete opposite. The early warning sign for me that I'm finding it difficult to kind of cope and my energy levels are low is that even if a WhatsApp message comes through, I just can't even look at it, let alone find the energy to respond. So we will all have different kind of warning signs. And I think there's maybe not enough conversation amongst team members, even kind of self-reflection within ourselves about what are those triggers for me, what are those warning signs that my cortisol and adrenaline is shooting up in my body and I've moved into survival mode. So that's the first thing I would say. And also to recognize that this physiological sort of, I guess, response that's happening in our body makes our brain work differently. You know, we don't have as much blood at the front of our brain, which is, you know, the prefrontal cortex. That's like the CEO of the brain. That's where our ability to think creatively lies. That's where our ability to have empathy for others. That's where our intelligence lies. That's where our ability to weigh up one option over the other. All of this lies at the front of the brain. And when we're in survival mode, the blood just doesn't flow there. It flows to other parts of the body that are focused on helping us to survive, like our heart and our lungs. So if we're starting to see some sort of unusual behaviour from colleagues, maybe a bit more slower to respond to emails, maybe a bit snappy on the Zoom calls, maybe they're taking things a bit personally, maybe they've are showing a kind of lack of attention to detail compared to before. You know, there's many things that we might see from ourselves, but also from the people around us, that really are indicators that their brain isn't functioning at the optimum of where it would be ordinarily. So I think there's a kind of almost like a compassion that's needed to one another, a kindness. If you're a line manager, you might find yourself thinking, hold on a sec, is this a performance issue? Is this somebody who maybe isn't up to the job, isn't up to the task? What I would say to you is if there were performance issues before the pandemic, then maybe there is an issue there and there's some training that's needed, or some, closer line management and maybe even some performance management. But if the performance issues weren't there before, I would say absolutely err on the side of caution and recognise that it will be symptoms of the environment that we're in. And if you have that type of relationship with your direct report or your colleague, really try and take that time to show empathetic listening, where you really listen and try and understand and appreciate what is going on in their world. What are they grappling with day to day, and where does work fit within that? I think that can really help to kind of build that mutual trust, where someone then feels more able to come to you when they are struggling and say, hands up, I need to take this afternoon, or whatever I need to do in order to recharge. I was talking to a line manager from St Mungo's actually the other day, and she said when they sort of first went into lockdown, every single person in the organisation that was a line manager received a personal call from the chief executive, and his very short call, but his mantra, his kind of message to them was, please look after yourself. You can't look after your team if you're not looking after yourself first. And I think there is some wisdom in that. Quite often we're looking out for other people, and a lot of people that are drawn to working in the charity sector, the third sector, are people that want to make a difference. It's within their values very often that they want to be there for others and support others. And therefore often our own needs can fall kind of way down the priority list. So there is something called radical self-care. We all know that we need to sleep, we all need to eat well, we all need to move our bodies, we all need to kind of rest and that kind of thing, limit screen time. We know what those kind of well-being boosters are, if you like, but most of us probably do those at best inconsistently. So radical self-care is about recognizing that doing those actions that boost our energy, that lift our resilience, that make us more courageous, isn't a selfish act. In fact, it's a selfless act, because we can be the best parent, the best sibling, the best friend, the best line manager, the best colleague that we can be if we are first looking after ourselves. So I encourage you all, anyone on the line, to think, what could I do today that is for me, that will really help bring me joy, boost my oxytocin, boost my serotonin in my bodies, those positive hormones that make us feel like we can take on the world, which is what we need at the moment as fundraisers. There is a document that I'll send around afterwards actually that is about leading through the pandemic, so what you can do to look after yourself and also look after your colleagues, so definitely check that out. And I think the final thing to say is that, as the same way that we would our donors, where we really value them, appreciate them, then we need to do that for our colleagues as well. So if you are a line manager, maybe reflect on, what are the signals that you're sending out? What messages are you giving to your team? Do they feel valued? Do they feel thanked? Do they feel recognised? Are you helping them to play to their strengths and do what they're good at and do what they enjoy, the majority of the time? Because as a line manager, as a colleague, if you can help people do what they're good at and they enjoy, the majority of the time, that is when you're going to bring out the best in them. That is when they're going to feel high in energy and more resilient. So I think I'll leave it there. there is a list of resources for anyone on this call or anyone who is working with anyone who maybe is experiencing mental health difficulties, extremely common during this time especially. So I really encourage you to sort of look at those resources if you can as well, because there's some brilliant organisations there that can help if you're experiencing depression or anxiety or anything like that. So I think I'll leave it there, Louise. There's so much that we can say, but I can see the questions coming in.
Thanks, there's so much good stuff there, and I'm fascinated by your comparison of the front of the brain to the CEO of ourselves, and I think we can all relate to when that is not working optimally, particularly during this pandemic. So thank you for all of those tips. So moving on, I'm attempting to change the slide, but it's having a slight pause like I've had before. So bear with me, Charlie. We're going to tell you really briefly a little bit about what we're up to over the next few months. And then we're going to come on to questions, and we're aiming to, I'm going to stop share and restart. We're aiming to get you away fully on time. We did the timings quite deliberately and in detail to be able to do that, didn't we, Charlie? We did our best.
Yeah.
So I'm just getting the slide up now. Right, I'm going to try again. So Charlie, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you're up to at the moment?
Yeah, sure. So most of what I'm doing at the moment is working with teams and helping them in the areas that I've just been talking about, essentially kind of helping them boost their resilience, boost their well-being, maybe take stock and reformulate as a team, come together and think, how do we want to work together, particularly now many of us are working at a distance, home working and so on, so feel maybe a bit more dispersed. So lots of training and I guess equivalent to team away days, but running them virtually. So I ran one the other day for Oxford University, the team that are raising money for medical sciences, that are, you know, raising money for the vaccine, hopefully, fingers crossed they get there. They're doing brilliant work there. And obviously as a team, they found themselves working at high pace, high speed, and yeah, just needing that time together to learn some new techniques and tools, both on an individual level, but as a team level. So if you recognize that you might need some support either on an individual level, maybe through some coaching, or as a team level, then by all means drop me an email. Really happy to have an exploratory chat. Can share with you some of the trends that I'm seeing across the sector, but also explore whether there's anything that I can do to help you or any other resources that I can point you in the direction of. So my details are there if you want to get in touch any point.
Thanks, Charlie. And I think something that so many teams, you know, are finding really challenging right now, as we've just been discussing, and quite rightly so. That's really, really valuable training.
Thanks, Louise. Yeah. And if anyone on this call wants more help with their sort of major gift fundraising, what can you help them with?
That's me. So I help a lot of charities set up their major donor programs and review them to raise more. And there's been a lot of change, so you can always contact me about that. But what I'm starting in the autumn is some new group coaching. This is the lovely Kelly, who I loved working with through the pandemic. They didn't even have major donor fundraising or really a program there, but she did some amazing stuff. Contact me in any of those ways. I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn, and that's my email address as well. If you're interested, I'm really interested in getting a group of people together who, in the last, what for many of us is going to be the last 6 months of the financial year, when there's going to be quite a lot of pressure to come together and really support each other and to challenge ourselves to try and raise more large gifts, and to do that in a really supportive way. And I've just set up a Facebook group. So if I can change the slide, which I might not be able to, I have. There's a really whizzy thing. If you would like to join, it's completely free, and I'm just putting some live videos and stuff in there. You can take your phone out, and if you go to your camera, it will take you to the page. This is about as technological as I get, really. But you can hold your camera up to the QR code, and it will take you there, or you can just search Summit Major Donor Group on Facebook. So it's quite small at the moment, but we're really building it. And again, that's just another way I want to support fundraisers and leaders with their major donor fundraising over the next year or so. And seeing it grow has been really great.
That's brilliant, Louise. I did that the other day, and it comes up with a couple of questions, doesn't it, that you need to answer in order to join, but really simple questions.
Thank you so much for the reminder. Yeah, I'd love to have you if you want to join. Please remember to
answer.
answer.
Thanks. Yeah.
and agree to the rules, yeah, which will not be a problem for any of you, I'm sure. So I think it's probably a good time now to spend the last kind of 10 minutes on questions. And as Charlie said, we'll be sending out a follow-up email after this. So any questions we don't get round to, we'll give you our best written answer and try and point you in the direction afterwards. Where do you want to start, Charlie?
Yeah, so there's a brilliant question here from Sophie Bennett, who I think that this might be more a question for you, Louise, but we can tackle it together. So Sophie has said that she started a new job during the lockdown. So first off, can't think of a more difficult time to start a new job, Sophie. So kudos to you. Hope it's going well. Can appreciate it can't be easy when you're, you know, at a distance trying to get to know colleagues and so on. And Sophie says that currently they have no major donors, and a lot of their programs have been cancelled. So she has got identified a bit of a pipeline of potential major donors, but feels at a bit of a loss of where to start. And there are some other questions on here as well that talk about not only about major donors, what should I be doing, but also major donor prospects during this time. So I think that kind of ties in quite nicely.
It does tie in, and a really good question. And I mean, just amazing work starting a new job and getting your kind of prospect list there. I mean, that's incredible progress. I tend to spit out in my mind prospects to your existing supporters who you've maybe flagged could raise more. So they might have given £200, £250, but they know your charity and they've supported your charity in some way, or they might be a volunteer. So I put in one group people who have already shown that they care about your charity and the work that they do in one camp, and then kind of cold major donors over here who've maybe never given to you and have had not too much contact. Certainly in the, you know, supporter camp, if they've already supported in some way or volunteered, a lot of what we've been talking about rings true. You obviously haven't got quite the same level of relationship that you would if you're already stewarding them over, you know, maybe years for a gift, but you can be picking up the phone, you can be asking for a coffee meeting. They're a supporter. At some point, you know, if they're not too lapsed, they care about what you're doing. And that can be a really great first step to actually find out a little bit more about someone. And ultimately, you want a coffee meeting, and that can be virtually like this. Charlie and I both work with Rob Woods at Bright Spot, and he talks about coffee meeting, and there's a reason for that. If you can meet someone face to face, you can spend most of that time finding out more about them, what they're passionate about, what they're interested in. So definitely, if they're in that kind of supporter camp, I would go for that. If they're cold, it is more challenging. It's not impossible. By cold, I mean they haven't given to your organisation. Maybe they haven't heard of it, but you've hopefully identified that they've got wealth, but also they've got an interest in the types of work you do, and don't forget that. So the third thing that I always think is really crucial to look for is a link. So if they're in this camp, the colder camp, what link have you got to them? Does anybody know them? Have you asked your trustees? Have you asked some of your long-standing donors? Actually, you know, we're interested in reaching these funders or these individuals. We think they'd be really passionate about our work. Do you know them? Can you make an introduction? And then, of course, you've got events. And events are so challenging because many of you will have done wonderful cultivation events to attract new people, because you know if you've got the right draw, the right speaker, the right beautiful location, that can be enough for someone to come and meet your charity when they might never have done that before. Now, that is obviously really challenging, and I don't know of any being planned for the autumn because of the level of uncertainty. But there are some amazing online events that have been done. Some have been done for existing supporters, but I think I'd be interested to see how it develops for potentially cold as well, and can it be trialed, because you could get an amazing speaker, an environmental charity. I know I've got links to David Attenborough. You could see that potentially attracting a new audience, a colder audience. So those are just some initial thoughts. I don't want to go on too long, but hopefully a few of those tips help.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Louise. Some brilliant examples there. Another question from Morris, which I'm happy to pick up quickly. Morris has asked, have you got any examples of the type of question that a fundraiser might look to include in a donor survey. Maurice, I actually have on my screen an example donor survey, which unfortunately I'm unable to share with you because it's intellectual property of the charity that it came from. But the kind of questions that are in there is, how important is it to you to attend events? Which of the following appeals did you support and why? Or I think they put in there, you supported these appeals, and what was it? What was the reason for doing that? Is there a particular reason why you haven't attended any of our events before? If you chose to donate to our organisation again, which of the areas of work would you be most likely to support? How would you like to be thanked for your organisation? What might encourage you to give again or increase your giving? How can we make it easier for you to give, etc. So it's very much kind of very easy to answer questions that have tick question, tick box, and then the odd box that has an answer where someone can type or handwrite an answer in there. But I suppose the idea is that you want to make the survey as easy as possible for someone to answer. And some organisations might kind of have a sort of prize draw link to it, so to try and encourage people to reply. In the major donor space, that might not feel quite right. You might want to maybe, send the survey with a personalised email or handwritten note, and very much use it as part of your cultivation. But if anyone wants any more information on donor surveys, research and so on, do feel free to get in touch, because I've got reams of examples that I can share. Another question, I think maybe is more for you, Louise, is about classifying income. So Chloe has asked, do you have any advice for classifying income? For example, events which are organised by major donors, and the income that's previously sat outside of major donor income line and the community line, who should steward and engage?
Great question. You won't be alone here. We've all been in roles where it's like, what does it get coded to? Same with trusts and major donors. Is it a trust? I mean, a lot of you will have, different views. There isn't one right or wrong way of doing this. The difference that for me I get with community and major donors is if it's their personal wealth. So I've worked in-house with some really well-connected individuals and some quite wealthy individuals. They weren't hugely motivated to give their own wealth for whatever reason. They wanted to fundraise, so they would have a garden party that would raise 15 grand with a relatively small number of guests, but they didn't want to give their personal wealth. So for me, that kind of subtle shift means that they would be managed by the community team, but also having connections to the major donor team, because if someone's well connected and they're really interested in your cause and they're raising money, then again, having a coffee meet and a little bit of transparency to say, I'm in awe of all the support you've given. Actually, we're trying, it's tough right now. We're trying to raise more and do more. And we've got this event, or I'm trying to have more coffee meets. Have you got anyone in mind that you think would be passionate about what we're doing and, would want to get more involved? So you can use that kind of peer-to-peer angle either way. But hopefully that, whether it's personal wealth or whether they're fundraising, will help. And of course, things aren't like that forever. People change, people move, and there is nothing wrong with having more than one relationship. And I think sometimes we want to simplify it, and we want one fundraiser to manage and look after one person. But of course, with the amount of movement that happens in the sector, really, the more relationships there are, the better, as long as you've got a good CRM and you're not treading on each other's toes and, calling them on the same day. And you know what you're doing. It's not a negative for them to be having, some love from different areas of the fundraising team. I don't know, Charlie, if you've got anything to add to that.
No, I think you've covered it, Louise. And I'm conscious that we've got a couple of more minutes. Do you think we have time to answer one more question?
Yeah, let's go for it.
So the final question on here is from Haji, who has asked, when is it appropriate to have a legacy conversation with a major donor? I've got some thoughts. Yeah. So I think firstly, research has shown that there's two kind of key time in an individual's life when they will write a will or update a will and therefore be considering whether they want to leave the money to a charity. That's when the individuals are starting a family or have a young family, and they need to make important decisions such as, if anything was to happen to me, who would look after my children, and they would need to put that in a will. So at that point, usually they're asked, and do you want to leave anything to a charity should anything happen? So that's one key moment in someone's life. And then obviously through later life, when someone is thinking about end of life or retirement, that kind of thing, and thinking, right, I've got some assets now, I want to make sure that it's divvied up how I want it to be once I've passed. So as fundraisers, it's our job to look after, if someone's told us that they're leaving a gift in their will to us, we need to look after them all the way through their lifetime, essentially, and not assume that we just talk to people about wills when they're later on in life and older. It's all the way through life that people, write wills and update their wills. I think now is a really good time to talk to major donors about legacy giving, especially if they're unable to write a check right now because of the uncertainty around their income, expenditure, business, and so on. Leaving a gift in their will is a really easy but tangible way that they can support. And there's lots of ways that conversation can be handled sensitively. The main way that I've done it in my career is to kind of present it in as one of a myriad of ways that people support our organisation. So I'll often talk to a major donor and say there's lots of different ways that you can support above and beyond what you're doing already, such as volunteering, campaigning, leaving a gift in your will, lending us your expertise, introducing us to your contacts, and so on. So leaving a gift in the will be there, and then I'll make sure I leave them, or send them some literature on it. And then also legacy fundraising, a lot of it is around marketing. So making sure that through your donor communications, there's a drip, drip, drip feed of that repeated message, and please consider us when you're updating your will. Please leave a gift in our will. And utilising those national events such as, is it National Will Week and Will Month, October time I think it is, which is a great initiative, and charities can piggyback on the back of that as well.
Thank you, Charlie.
I think we're
so much.
1 minute towards half past, Louise, so perfect timing. Shall I wrap up just quickly? Or yeah, brilliant. So thank you to everybody for dialing in. We don't take it lightly that you've trusted us with your lunch break. We really don't. And yeah, really kudos for you to sort of prioritise coming along to something like this and prioritising your self-development and professional development. We will be in touch over email with this recording and some of the handouts we've mentioned. We really hope they're useful. If you don't want to hear from either of us again, do just let us know, and we can make sure that you don't receive any subsequent emails. Neither of us spam, so if you don't email us, you'll just receive the odd update about any training or coaching or initiatives that we have coming up. But like I say, if you don't want to receive that, do just let us know. And if you have any questions as well, I think we've covered all the questions in the chat box, which is great. So when you receive the email, feel free to reply directly, and we will come back to you with any other help that we can give. So thank you so much for dialing in. We'll bring it to a close now, and stay safe and look after yourselves in this heat as well. And thanks so much for joining us.
Everyone, bye.